Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll just give a minute or two for all of you to join and get your audio sorted, and then we'll get started. Can see people filtering in now as we speak, so I can see the numbers going up. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining tonight and for choosing to spend some of your Easter Monday with us as well. As I said just a second ago, we'll just give it a minute or so for people to join, and then we'll get going into the event. Right, I can see quite a few people have joined us now, so we will kick off and get started. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Young Fabians Local Elections Candidates Roundtable. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Laura Cunliffe-Hall and I'm Communications Officer for the Young Fabians, and I'm delighted to host this roundtable event tonight. We're going to be hearing from some of our fantastic Young Fabian members who are running for office as Labour candidates across Britain on May 6th. They've proven themselves to be dedicated activists and leaders, and if elected as councillors, they'll have the opportunity to improve their communities through their powers and advocacy. Tonight, we're going to discuss their experiences of campaigning, what that's like campaigning as a young person, also canvassing during a pandemic, why they're running, how we can support them, and also their advice for anybody watching tonight who's considering running in an election in the future. I'll just go through a brief bit of housekeeping in terms of how we're going to structure the event tonight. So shortly we'll go to each of our speakers who will introduce themselves. I'll then ask them some questions before we open it up to the audience for a Q&A where you can ask your questions. And we're due to finish at around 7:15. Please do pop any questions you have during the event into the Zoom Q&A function, and then we can put them to our candidates later on in the session. Just to let you know as well, I'm sure you can see that this event is being recorded and streamed live and will be uploaded to the Young Fabians YouTube channel in due course as well. Please do feel free to share the Facebook Live link I think Mark's put in the chat with anyone else that you think will be interested in the meantime. Now I think that's enough of the boring stuff from me, so I'll go around to each of our candidates who are going to introduce themselves, explain a little bit about why they're running, where they're running, and we'll start with Jonathan.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm running for a seat on Surrey County Council. It's called Bagshot, Windlesham and Chobham. It's quite a rural seat and very, very conservative. So leafleting it is quite difficult. There's a lot of long roads, long private roads with driveways that go on forever. So I'm standing basically because although it's not a Labour target seat, there are actually quite a few Labour voices here and Labour votes to be had. And so I think it's good that we stand in all areas and we try and get a swing across the country to Labour.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And next we will go to Will.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. I'm Will. I'm running in Tottington Ward, which is in Bury Borough Council. I've been a member of the Labour Party for the last 7 years and a member of the Young Fabians for the last year. I'm also secretary of the Young Fabians Education Network, and that's why improving education for LEA schools in Bury is one of the key focuses of my campaign.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Will. And next we'll go to Milo.
Hello, I'm Milo and I'm Young Fabians Executive, and I'm running in Humshaugh, which is a ward in Northumberland Unitary Authority. It's very large, one of the largest county seats in England, slightly smaller than the island of Malta, so that sort of gets the size of that. and I'm running on a variety of issues, such as local transport issues, but also it's important to get these Labour candidates in these rural seats for other campaigns that cross borders, such as police and crime commissioners, where you can make a sizable difference, especially in terms of turnout.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Milo. And next we'll go to Helen.
Hi, I'm Helen. I'm running in a ward called North Manor in Bury North in Greater Manchester, so the same area as well, but different seat. A very conservative seat, and I'm running because one of the things that's really important in that area is the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, which if you don't know, it's the housing targets and the infrastructure around them, the greenbelt land they're built on. It's a very big issue in the area. It's something that's very important to me, and I think with the current change towards Labour and towards the centre left of the Labour Party, it was important for me to have the people of that ward see a candidate that believes in that change, I suppose, to still have a voice there. And in past 4 local elections, we've been successful in shrinking the Conservative majority, so I'm hoping we continue to shrink that and then switch the seat to Labour.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Helen. That was fab. And next we will go to Tina.
Thank you. I'm Tina Bhartwas. I'm standing for Hertfordshire County Council in a division called Letchworth North. I'm quite heavily involved in the Labour and Cooperative parties, and I'm also the co-founder and chair of the Young East of England Fabians. I'm running for office in the upcoming elections because I think these elections are vital to rebuilding, and I want to see a county which is prosperous, caring and socially just for all of the people that live in our communities.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tina. And then last but not least by any means, we will go to Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad. I'm running for ISIS division for Oxfordshire County Council, which encompasses kind of suburbs south of the city centre, as well as some university colleges in the glorious Iffley village. I'm running in the election, I suppose, to really kind of change the direction of the county council and really make a big issue and some of the social, big changes on the social policy points of view, in terms of tackling the mental health crisis, investing in youth and children's services, as well as transforming our transport system, making it more green and sustainable.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Brad. And thank you all of you for those introductions and also for taking the time to join us tonight at what must be an especially busy point in each of your respective campaigns. So really appreciate that. And now I want to go straight into questions. And I think it was quite interesting. Some of you have picked up on this in your sort of introductory statements, but first and foremost, how have you selected relevant campaign issues to run on? And what was your thought process behind that selection? So I will go first to Jonathan on this one.
So the seat I'm standing in is pretty rural. It's quite large, and there's a lot of green space. So quite a lot of forest, quite a lot of heathland, and we had a very bad fire that made national news, but you probably don't remember it, in Chobham Common last year. And so one of the big things I'm focusing on my campaign is cuts to the fire service in this area, because climate change is only going to make the risk of wildfires here worse. And since 2011, the Conservative Council has cut the number of firefighters by 1/3, and that's a huge cut when the population has increased here. So a big part of my campaign is, these cuts can't continue if our community is going to be safe. Yeah.
And I think that's a really important point around sort of rebuilding our local areas from decades of Tory austerity and cuts. And I think, I'm sure that's a sort of common theme that will run through a lot of the motivations behind our candidates tonight. I'd like to go to Helen next on that question, if that's all right.
Yeah, so one of the things I mentioned was the GMSF. That's important to me and it's really important to residents. One of the other things that's really important is crime. It's quite a wealthy area. Obviously, people work hard, they have nice houses, they have nice cars, and they want them to be kept safe. So while there isn't a massive crime rate in North Manor, I'll admit, we do want more police officers, more PCSOs. People want to keep the nice things they have safe, which I think is really important. I know my family do, I know I do, I know most people do. So that's something that's important to me. And also the current Conservative MP for the area, James Daly, is a councillor for North Manor and currently picks up 2 salaries. So one as a councillor, one as an MP. I don't believe, and I know a lot of people would agree, they don't believe you can do both those jobs sufficiently at the same time. So I'd like to be, and hope to be, an alternative to half a councillor and be a full councillor and dedicate that time to the people of North Manor.
Thank you very much, Helen. I completely agree. And I think that's a really important point about being a councillor is such an important job, and you should be able to dedicate all of your time to serving your community in that way. So I think that's a particularly important point. And Tina, I'll go to you next on that question as well, if that's all right.
Thank you. So I think the way that I've selected relevant campaign issues, it's been a mixture of my own life experience. I grew up in poverty and we really struggled. If it hadn't been for the county council's provision of free school meals and a free bus pass, I wouldn't be where I am today. I've spent a lot of time in the community. I'm a local charity trustee. I've been involved with community cafes, and I've also campaigned on issues like free school meals, education provision, and climate change. Now, I've spoken to hundreds of people in Letchworth over the last 2 years, canvassing for the Labour Party, and I think all of those factors mean that I understand the issues impacting my local community quite well. So we want to see flooding addressed, we want to see speeding tackled, a crossing put in front of a local school, because that situation is really dangerous at the moment. We want to see community and voluntary sector groups supported. We are advocating for a climate change initiative fund to make sure that the local community is able to have this impact and control over what's happening in the area. And there's so many groups doing so much work on this, and we want to support them. That's kind of how I've picked the issues that I'm standing on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tina. I think all of those are really, really important, and sort of great to have a candidate like yourself to champion those as well. Just wanted to offer Milo, Will and Brad the chance to come in on that question. Otherwise, happy to move on to the next one. But if there is anything in particular you'd like to sort of respond in terms of that, please do come in now.
I'll be quick. So I grew up in the village and sort of know the local area, and I think there's a lot of fear about isolation. So, for example, our post office shut over 10 years ago, and we're relying on sort of that, a temporary one to visit every week. So, and also the bus service in terms of being irregular, so about once or twice a day, and that's unreliable for older people who can't drive, or people just don't have access to a car. So I'm focused on these basic services, bread and butter issues that people care about, and you don't have to be the most political person to understand that we should invest in bus services, especially in rural communities. I think that really gets people, regardless if you're 85 or 18.
Thank you very much. And Will or Brad, is there anything you'd like to come in on that question before we move on? No from Brad. Will?
No, I'm fine to carry on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And also, I think it would be really interesting to find out, and Brad, I'll go to you first on this one, but how the campaign is going so far, and what sort of reaction have you received from your local community?
I think things are going relatively quite reasonably well. I mean, I think that often people's probably I mean, I'm quite in a lucky position, as it were, in the sense that it's quite an active community, in the sense that it's a very kind of engaged kind of local issues and whatever, and so there's a very active dialogue there between us as Labour Party candidates, the existing councillors, and the local community about issues, and so that's kind of really what's kind of taking up part of the campaign, our conversations with people. But I mean, the best thing about that is that I mean, obviously all areas across the country are very different, but I'm quite lucky in where I'm running that we've had Labour representation for quite a long time. And so we've built up a really strong connection with local people, and they feel very much that they can trust us and they know that we're listening to them, which is really important. And so we're just trying to work very hard to try and keep that success streak going, and to keep that trust going.
Definitely, thank you very much. And I think that point about sort of trust and connecting with voters during the campaign is really important. And Will, I sort of wanted to go to you next in terms of that same question as to sort of how have you found the experiences of the campaign so far, and sort of how have people reacted in your community to sort of your messages and your campaign?
Yeah, no, I've been quite fortunate, really. We've had a really good local Labour team. I've actually been spending most of the day calling people today to ask them to deliver my leaflets, and we've had a really good response. I think we've had people volunteer to deliver 3,000 in the next week or so, which has been an amazing response, far better than I was hoping for. In terms of from the local community, I mean, the ward I'm standing in, Tottington, is a traditionally Tory seat. The last Labour victory was 2012. So it's by no means, absolutely unwinnable, but I would be quite surprised if I was to win it. But despite all of that, the response has been pretty good via dialogue. With about 40% of our contacts have been Labour, or have don't knows but are leaning towards Labour. And we've been having around 25, 30 contacts when we're doing a phone bank session. So we're having a decent response locally. So there's been a lot of buy-in from the local community. So overall, I've been quite happy with how it's been going.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And I think that's really interesting points you've raised about in terms of sort of using dialogue and phone banking. So that actually leads quite neatly onto one of the other questions, which is basically relating to campaigning during the pandemic, which obviously has many challenges, and how that's been in comparison to other elections you may have been involved with in the past, whether as a candidate or supporting. And sort of following on from that, which tools would you say, whether that's social media, phone banking, using dialogue, or door knocking now that it's back and we're sort of allowed to do it safely in groups of 6 with masks on, what have you found to be sort of the most effective way of getting messages across to your local community? So I'll go to Jonathan first on that one.
Well, so my CLP were very poorly prepared for the pandemic. They're quite elderly, let's put it, and they like campaigning on the doorstep, setting up street stalls, etc. So this election is actually really interesting. It's the first time that we've engaged in Facebook advertising, and I've been, as a young person, I've been completely in charge of that. And that seems a pretty cost-effective way, actually, of getting to people. We got a lot of angry comments on it. But you can see, local residents are obviously seeing it as a result, and that's obviously a positive. Apart from that, unfortunately, Labour's dialogue records in this area are very poor. Obviously, we're not a target seat, so going on it, most of the numbers aren't valid anymore. They're all old. So I had a nice chat with a 90-year-old lady the other day who just celebrated her birthday. But that's been about it. So phone banking hasn't been great here, but I know other seats it's been a lot more helpful.
That's quite interesting, actually. And I think, yeah, it sort of goes to show in terms of specific areas, you're going to have the different methods that sort of actually resonate more with voters and connect with communities. So that's quite an interesting point. Soon Tina's happy to come in on this, so I'll go to Tina next.
Thank you. In terms of kind of how the campaign's been going, I think it's been really positive. We need a 2% swing to take this seat back. So it's really tight. I've personally made, I think, like 1,500 calls, and that's just me. We're delivering over 11,000 leaflets as we speak. So lots and lots going on there. And obviously social media is essential for what we're trying to do. I think campaigning during the pandemic, it's so different. And had the pandemic not happened, I don't think I would have taken any sort of break from the doorstep. So there's that. I think that social media and phone banking, they are really effective, and people want to talk, people want to share their concerns. A lot of people are lonely and wanting to get some of these worries off their chest, but I don't think there is a substitute for what we do when we door knock, and that one-to-one personal connection. It's so valuable, and I'm looking forward to being back out on the doorstep.
Fantastic, thanks very much, Tina. And I completely agree with you in terms of sort of making those connections on the doorstep is such a sort of valuable tool, and being able to kind of talk directly with people. And I think there's sort of definitely pros and cons for sort of all the different ways of communicating with voters. But Will, I'll go to you next to come in on that.
No, I think social media definitely has a place. I think it's been really interesting seeing over the past year how we've been using it quite effectively. As for the dialogue versus doorstep, I mean, for me, I think a lot of it depends on what does the actual area look like. If you're campaigning in an area that's quite rural and the houses are quite far apart and there's long drives, then dialogue should be the go-to, because actually you're going to get through a lot more people than you are if you're going from door to door. And if you're campaigning in an urban area where it's largely terrace housing, and you can just go from one door to the next in 20 seconds. So I think there's definitely a role for both, and I don't think dialogue's going to go when we hopefully go past the pandemic in the future.
Completely agree, and I think sort of making sure that we're sustaining all of these methods and sort of maximising the efficiency of all the different tools as well, sort of as you say, Will, is really important, and kind of taking an either-or approach. And I'll just if Helen or Milo, or Brad, if you want to come in on that question as well before we move on to the next one, I'll just leave it open for you guys.
I was just going to say quickly, a lot of what we did pre-pandemic we're still doing. So Bury Council is currently held by Labour. So when the pandemic happened, all of the food banks we still had, all the education provision, some of which existed online anyway, domestic violence support, a lot of those council services that people, if you didn't use them, you might not know about, have really come into their own and increased that visibility. And I think for people that aren't on social media or aren't necessarily home when we call them, we couldn't door knock, they've still seen us out in the community, supporting the community. And I think that's always, whatever situation we're in, going to be important, because there's still a lot of things that we could do, such as food banks and education provision that we've been able to do.
Completely, and I think that point around sort of visibility and being there to support your local community, particularly in sort of difficult times like these as well, that have been so challenging for everybody, is a really important point there. I think Milo and Brad, unless you sort of have anything else to come in on that, I sort of would like to move on to discussing quite an interesting point I think we touched on earlier, and this is sort of relating to how have you found the sort of support you've received from the Labour Party as a young candidate, and from your point of view, what more would you say that the party can do to support and encourage young people running in elections like these in future? So Milo, I'll go to you first on this one, if that's all right.
Well, this is my first time at the rodeo, as it were. I ran back in 2013, so a lifetime ago, when I was 18, and I think it can be very opaque. The systems and the process, and especially the pandemic hasn't made it easy. But it would be good to have this more clearer information. It doesn't all have to be glossy YouTube videos, but all the information being out there, whether that be how you do nominations, all of that stuff, to get ideas of campaigning. I think it depends on if you got somebody who could take you under their wing, or if you have to find it yourself. I think this is the challenge, especially if you're not on a target seat. You're not going to expect everything to be laid out for you, but it could be helpful just to have sort of, here's a young person who's 25, he's a councillor nearby, he could show the ropes. I think it doesn't help. My area doesn't really have any Labour councillors, and if they are, the other, because Northumberland's the biggest geographic area for a so all Labour things are the other end of the county. It's about an hour's drive, so we're quite isolated in terms of our stuff. But yeah, I think Labour could be better in terms of making information there, making it more accessible, and having sort of a buddy system would be quite useful, because like most CLPs, you're going to get most people who are slightly more older and a bit more disconnected from how it's going. And also might have been doing this since 1962. So you need some people who might have a bit more contemporary reference in terms of campaigning.
Definitely, thank you. I think that point as well about a buddy system is quite interesting. And Brad, I'll put that same question to you. And would you kind of find a buddy system useful to sort of help you navigate through the process, and sort of how have you found the kind of existing mechanisms of party support for young candidates?
I mean, I think the biggest way the National Party can support kind of young candidates, but kind of all candidates really, to be honest, is about, at the moment, the kind of campaigning infrastructure kind of from the National Party through to regional is quite detached from CLPs and kind of campaigning on the ground. And I think that reviewing how that works and how the kind of integration between those different layers work, so that we kind of have a consistent passing down of knowledge and experience, expertise, and kind of software and materials is really essential, so that we can have a system which allows Labour to win and organise in all communities across the country. At the moment, you're very, and I know this, although, you know, at the moment I'm running for the county council in Oxford, I've also run previously for a far less winnable seat in Bath a couple of years ago, which is obviously not, where Labour is currently third in elections. So I mean, I've seen it at both sides, and I think that the National Party needs to make sure that there is kind of support and encouragement and a real dynamism behind making sure that Labour is active in all communities and campaigning across country, and there isn't such variation between different areas. It really shouldn't be a kind of luck of the draw in terms of where you're standing, the amount of support you can get from your local party, and they're based on their previous track record of what campaigns they've run, sort of thing.
I think that's a really interesting point, Brad, particularly around centralisation of resources and sort of having sort of a knowledge share and resource bank in future. And I think that sounds like that'd be something that's really helpful. Before we move on, I'll just go to Helen on that question, if there's sort of anything you'd like to add from your experience.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a really helpful local Labour Party, to be honest, because they've been in control of the council for quite a while. We've got a lot of experienced councillors, a lot of young people that can support us. But the most useful thing I've had in the past year was a mammoth long email with a crib sheet attachment that was maybe 40, 50 pages long from the Northwest Regional Office. And I got it and thought, gee, this is overwhelming. It was actually the most useful thing, because it was different resources and different ways to get in touch with your community. So things like finding out who your local PCSO officer actually is, how to get in touch with them. So if you talk to someone and they have a criminal issue they want to discuss, you have someone to signpost them to, how to find out the local schools in the area, how they're doing for Ofsted, so you know how residents feel about those schools and the kind of education, if they're at risk of becoming an academy and things like that. So I'd say reach out to anyone that you can to support with those type of things. But if anyone's in the Northwest and got that email, that was the most useful thing to me from kind of the central Labour Party, I suppose.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that sounds really useful. And as you say, sort of when you have all those sort of resources in one place, it just makes it a lot easier for you as well to then kind of fine tune your campaign issues and sort of focus on the specifics as a candidate, which I think probably just makes everybody's lives easier in the long term as well. And I think there's some sort of quite interesting dialogue that has been going round recently about candidates' experiences based on their age, and sort of wanted to ask each of you, have you experienced any issues in being sort of taken seriously as a candidate due to your age, particularly as a young candidate? And sort of how have you been able to address this in your campaign to show people that the sort of stereotypical image of a councillor as an old white man, that doesn't have to be the case, and sort of how have you been able to dispel that in the work that you've been doing? So I wanted to go to Jonathan on that first, if that's all right.
So what I find quite surprising actually is that while the local Conservatives are quite friendly, it's the Liberal Democrats that I've had issues with. So our local Lib Dem candidate used to be heavily involved in the Labour Party, and they're a bit salty. So I had a tweet at me saying how they've been involved in politics since 1983, and then something else said, "Oh, we've been speaking to loads of people, and none of them have heard of you." So yeah, so they're quite aggressive in this area. I also had so apart from that, it's not been too bad. I did have a lady the other day who said, "Oh, you look too young to be a candidate," and I realised, you know, the face mask covers your beard if you're a man and growing one, so maybe it makes me look younger. Yeah, so it's not been too bad, but there are definitely isolated issues, I think. Yeah, it's just a bit of negativity from the other candidates in my case.
Yeah, definitely. And I think particularly that sort of point you were saying where people say, "Oh, you look too young for," you know, it's such a ridiculous statement, and it's just so active and exactly against the point of everything that sort of you guys are doing as young candidates. And yeah, sort of is just distracting from all the issues really, which I'm sure is why some lazy opponents try and mobilise that. I'll go to Tina next on that, because I know she sort of discussed this quite extensively in the past as well.
Yeah, I have done. I actually, this is because this isn't my first time running. I've had a whole host of different experiences. I think you're right about this kind of stereotype of who a councillor is, but then there's also the stereotype of what a young person is and what they do, and I've come across that a lot. I think as well, certainly in my case, I think intersectionality plays into it a huge amount. Now, this time round, I've not had a huge amount of, well, there's not been anything externally. Residents have been really supportive, even people who aren't voting for me, still really willing to talk. And that was a really similar experience to last time as well. But like last time, there have been issues internally in the Labour Party, and I do want to address that, because I think that it's really difficult to kind of know how you're going to respond to something when somebody is basically telling you that they feel like you haven't done anything, and it's kind of like how do you get out of that? Because it doesn't matter what you say you've done or what you've actually done. It is just that image of a young person. And I find it really frustrating, because we want to encourage young people and diverse candidates to come forward, but this sort of behaviour is not all right, and it's not helping. I think one of the things I've done as a result of this kind of thing happening to me is very much kept my door open to any young people who want to talk about being a candidate. I've put messages out along the lines of, you know, please do get in touch if you have any kind of questions, but that emotional support is really important. And I think this probably links to another question you're going to ask later, but how close-knit this group of people is in the Young Fabians have found that really, really valuable throughout this campaign, and with all sorts of other things I've been involved in as well. So I'm really grateful for that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tina. And I think it's really great that sort of you've managed to find that support network in the Young Fabians. And I know sort of everyone in the Young Fabians is proud of all of you for sort of putting yourselves forward, and we're definitely backing you every step of the way for sure. Before we move on, I just wanted to put that question to Helen as well, to see if you sort of had any additional thoughts in relation to sort of being, inverted commas, taken seriously as a young candidate, and particularly as a young woman.
Yeah, I've had, from constituents, I've had overwhelming support. People that have said on the phone, "I'm glad you're a woman. I'm glad I have a woman option. I'm glad that you're young." I don't think I've ever been in a room with an older Labour Party member who hasn't had a drink or two and then told me I'm the future, which is true, because I am, and that's great. There is a tiny bit of prejudice, I suppose, when it comes to overprotectiveness. So I've had possibly lovely people that support the Conservative Party telling me on social media that I'm from Warrington, I don't recall ever going to Warrington. I'm certainly not from there. I've lived in Bury for some 24, 25 years. So bizarre things like that you get and all candidates get, and I generally get told by the older generation in the party, just don't comment, just it's fine, like we'll deal with it. I think, no, I'm all right actually saying, no, you're mistaken, I've lived in Bury for 24 years, this is the primary school and the high school and the college I went to. So I think there's a little bit of that maybe overprotectiveness, which is nice and incredibly well-meaning, but it does take a little while to say, no, I'm all right, I've got this. And I think people possibly need to see that from you as a young candidate, rather than you giving the reins to someone else and saying, okay, you deal with it. So there's a tiny bit of that, but it's from a well-meaning place, I suppose.
That makes sense. And yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned Matt Helen. So I was reading a blog by, I think, somebody who was previously one of the youngest councillors elected a few years back or something in 2015. And she sort of mentioned in that there's the aspect of people who are so keen to help you, but they almost are sort of trying to say, this is what you should do, and sort of, making sure that you can run the campaign on your own terms, because, at the end of the day, it's your name that's on the leaflets and you're the person that's running, and you sort of know what's best in that sort of regard. And I think that's a sort of a really important bridge to have as well, to sort of make sure you're able to put your own points across in your own way, and sort of make sure that you're addressing the issues that are most important for local residents, and kind of incorporating your experiences into that as well. Sort of from a similar perspective, really wanted to move on to the next question. And that's just all about what inspired you to run for office in the first place. And also, what would you say has been the most rewarding experience of your campaign so far? So I'll go to Will first on that one, if that's all right.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think this really is the key question, because ultimately, you're going to be stuck in a lot of meetings where you're not going to be particularly riveted or excited about a 4-hour meeting on potholes or standing orders. So I think it's really, really important that you have something that really, really motivates you. And for me, it was improving LEA schools in Bury. I've always been interested in education and its value within society. It's what I do as a career. I'm a maths teacher, and it's what I do as secretary of the Education Network. So really what inspired me was sort of that idea of promoting schools in Bury. And because it was something that I knew a lot about, it was something I could really make the argument for. I know we were just talking about, the idea that somehow, people, just seeing what Mark said, the idea that young people shouldn't have a voice in politics. It's like, no, actually, I'm here to talk about education, and I know what I'm talking about. So listen to what I have to say. I think if you do have something that really does inspire you, and you have that knowledge of it, then you can really stand up for it and make a massive difference that way. I'm not naive enough to think that I'm going to change the world through this campaign, but say if I'm able to make a small difference, a small improvement, then that's enough for me within the context of this campaign.
Completely. Thanks very much, Will. And I think that's a really important point about, you've got to make sure that you're sort of, you're connected to what you're doing, and sort of that idea of making a small difference, but that can actually have really long lasting benefits for people across local communities is something that's really important as well. And that sort of obviously sort of drives all of you to want to run for office. Brad, I'll put that same question to you, if that's all right, in terms of what inspired you to run for office, and sort of what experiences have you found to be most rewarding as you've conducted your campaign so far?
I mean, to put it simply, I'd say is that existing councillors have been my inspiration as to why I wanted to run, in the sense that they're the difference that people can make in their communities, whether it be kind of on the kind of micro pavement politics style thing, in terms of getting that investment in that local community centre, even getting a bin next to bus stop or something. People really appreciate that, and it makes a big difference to how people see their area. But then also the big things that people can do. So building new council homes, securing that vital investment in those kind of mental health services or youth services, keeping a children's centre open. All these things are kind of huge things for local communities, and obviously in local government, we are proving time and time again the difference Labour can make and the difference Labour values can make. And I think that's just always, you know, whether it be in the patch that I'm particularly living or somewhere else across the country, you know, it's always an inspiring thing. And, you know, it proves, you know, why we should all get involved and make that difference, because we can make a big difference.
Completely agree. And I think sort of all the work that Labour councillors do on the ground across the country is so inspiring, and as you say, it makes that difference, which is particularly important when we sort of have the Conservative government that we're under as well, but that we are able to have these positive changes at a local level. And I know Tina wants to come in on this, so I'll go to her next on that question.
Thank you. So I was inspired to stand by my community. My town means everything to me. It's where I grew up, it's where I went to school, it's made me who I am. And I think that it's just that, you know, really wanting to help people and serve my community. When I first got involved at the end of the first campaign I was ever involved in, we took control of the district council alongside the Liberal Democrats for the first time in 20 years. And I can see the difference we're making. We're changing lives, and that really, really matters. Now we have one county councillor in our district, and we're lacking that Labour representation and, you know, our Labour values, which are never more needed. In terms of rewarding experiences in this campaign, I've been very grateful for the support that I've got from the Co-op Party. I'd also like to give a shout out to my trade union. GMB have been there for me for the duration of this campaign, and not just with this campaign, but all kinds of things. I think the most rewarding thing to come out of this campaign really has been being able to support local people with the issues that matter to them, whether that's finding out where they can find more information about developments, whether that's, you know, flagging a flooding issue, kind of seeing what we can do to push harder for 20-mile-per-hour speed limits, all of these things that day in, day out matter to people, and having those conversations with people who really need it. I know I really do. It's a mutual thing, and it's really important to me.
Definitely. Thank you, Tina. I think that's a really important point, and that sort of connection to local people as well, and sort of making sure that you're able to fight for their best interests is a really, really important factor. And we'll open it up to audience questions shortly. I know we've already sort of had a few in the chat and the Q&A. So if anybody does have any questions, please do feel free to add those in now. Just going to ask one last question before we do. Which is sort of how is being involved. Oh wait, sorry, I'll just go to Jonathan quickly on that last question before we go to the next one.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought it's a really interesting observation of the different experiences we had, because I think it was Brad who was saying his Labour councillors. Well, he said he initially said his councillors had inspired him to run, and I thought he was going to say, you know, it's Conservative run and they're really bad, and that's why he's inspired. So it's very similar. It's a similar situation in my area. I'm inspired by the councillors to run, but I'm inspired by how they've let down the community. So it's, you know, it's the exact opposite, really. Yeah.
Definitely, and I think that's a really interesting point. We were sort of talking about it earlier before the event started, but sort of as a group, obviously, we've got kind of representation across the country and how that sort of affects your motivations and campaign pledges and all sorts, also sort of what we have in common. So I think that's definitely a really interesting point, Jonathan. And I'll ask this question briefly, so I'll probably just go to two of our candidates to make sure we have time for our audience questions. And I'm going to go to Milo first on this, but it's basically relating to how's being involved in the Young Fabians and the wider Fabian Society helped you as a candidate, and how can the Young Fabians continue to support you as in this exciting sort of final month of your campaign?
I think the Young Fabians and Fabian give you so much opportunities to develop your new skill set, whether that be, you know, writing something for a blog or a pamphlet, going to different events. I think it's the other people sort of inspire you, because you see such wonderful things from people who just come and they're doing X, Y, and Z to people like Tina is standing and making their voices heard loudly and clear. And you see that and think, you know, if they could do that, I could do that. And it's also just feeding off the good energy and positive vibes people give off. So I think Young Fabians is a solid community, and it just inspires you. Even if it's not something directly linked to campaigning, you can go to an event on international affairs and you think, I feel more informed. And if for some reason somebody asks you on the doorstep about, you know, your positiveness, you can think back to, oh, I was listening to expert X, Y, and Z. They said this, and I think it's just all feeding you your confidence, your skill set that I am a well-informed person, and I'd be a great representative for my local community, and I'm going to do my best if elected.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Milo. And I think that's a really important point and sort of builds on what Tina was discussing earlier in regards to the kind of support network as well. And I'll go to Helen just quickly on that before we go into audience questions.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps transferable skills for things like writing, things like thinking about policy areas you might not come into contact with in your general CLP. And for myself and Will, not to speak on his behalf because we're in the same area, we say constantly that it's a space that we can be heard. Because sometimes when you're in a room full of people, in a virtual room, for an hour, 3 hours, 4 hours, who've been here and done this 1,000 times, sometimes it's hard to be heard. Whereas in the Young Fabians, we are heard, and it's just a given that everyone wants to hear your voice. So definitely for me, I know Will can speak for himself, but in the past year, it's been incredibly beneficial to feel we had that space to be heard. So when we come back to our own CLP and our own kind of borough, we've got more of a voice, we feel more confident and more validated in our opinions to speak up in that space.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think that's a really important point around sort of having the space in which you can kind of, you know, freely communicate your ideas and learn from like-minded people. And I think it's fantastic. That's sort of been a great space for sort of you as candidates as well. Seen a question that's actually from a candidate in the City of Wolverhampton ward of Tettenhall, Whitewick from Cashmire. They've asked, for those like me who are running in a safe Conservative seat, what expectations are you taking, knowing that it can feel a little bit annoying? So happy for anyone to come in on that. So yeah, just sort of, yeah, Jonathan, I'll go to you.
So I don't think, well, right, so you obviously don't want to set expectations really high, but having said that, you're always in it to win it. You don't know what's going to happen, and it's just worth campaigning for every vote, really. So I've set, well, so the Labour candidate in the election before last did actually quite well. And so if I can replicate their performance, I'll be pretty happy. But yeah, I think campaign for every vote, but you don't, it's obviously difficult. But yeah, just keep campaigning, really.
Definitely, I think that's a really good message. Milo, I'll go to you on that one as well.
Yeah, so I think, it's a bit like a lottery. You're not probably going to win it, but you got to have the chance. And without hope, there's nothing. There's no point. If you buy a lottery ticket, you have to imagine you're going to win it rather than not do it. But I think you have to look at the wider races. So, like, Northumberland is part of the Northumberland Police Crime Commission is Newcastle and Northumberland. So even if I'm not getting to win the council, there's all these votes will add up into things. And if you're in the West Midlands, you want to get Andy Street out of office and get into the West Midlands office, get a good Fabian into that office, and all these other campaigns, and also provide you skills. You develop as a candidate, and hopefully next time you can either go for get a more winnable seat, or you make such strides this one that it becomes more winnable next time you run in that seat. Because that local presence, you can, after a couple of times, you get reputation. You're doing this and that. People know they trust you, even if it's a leans Conservative. Something that it's planting these trees to grow into something strong in the future.
Thank you. I love that. The great sort of green metaphor there as well. Before we go on to the next question, I'll just offer that to either Helen or Tina as well.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's really vital that we have Labour representation, someone on the ballot paper for our voters to vote for, because imagine if you didn't have that, it would be so incredibly disheartening. And as it's been mentioned before, we're laying groundwork, and that's really important. I believe that our message needs to be taken to every community. I've been really strong on this for a long time, and there are parts of my constituency which are really rural, have been Tory pretty much since, you know, the seats have been formed. But it is important that we're out there and we're listening. That's what the Labour Party is all about at the end of the day. We want to hear from people. We want to share our Labour values, and we want to be better. And that's what you're doing by being a Labour candidate.
That was very well put, Tina. I can see why you're a candidate there, definitely. And I'll just go to Will on that one as well.
No, thank you, Laura. No, I think it's a really good question. I know Helen and I, we've had a sort of similar position where we're standing quite Tory wards. So I know how frustrating it can be. But I think it's important to remember that, you know, being a councillor is just one of the ways for supporting your community. You know, if you're campaigning on issues that you really genuinely care about, you know, for me, it's education, for other people, it'll be different things. But if you've picked a topic that you really care about, you know, you've researched it and you've made the strong argument for your beliefs, people will see that and they will remember that. So that way, when you go for, you know, for a safer seat next time, they're going to think, well, this person does know what they're talking about. You know, they're really well informed. They really do care. You've got to be thinking, you know, it's not just about this election. It's about what is it going to do in 2 or 3 years.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point, Will, about that kind of longer term lens and perspective as well, and sort of not just thinking about the immediate, you know, the next 6 months, but as you say, sort of looking into the future as well, and the kind of wider community investment and benefits of what you're going to do, and sort of how that's going to sort of envision itself in future. So I think that's a really important point. I've seen we've got 2 questions in the Q&A as well, so I want to make sure we get to these. And I'll start with the anonymous question, but then we've got a question from Archie. And Archie, we will come to you to answer the question live if that's okay. But if you'd prefer not to, if you're having audio issues, just message and I'm happy to ask that for you. But I'll start with the anonymous question first, which is all about sort of how did you get into running for office and what was the process of becoming a candidate? So I'll go to Brad first on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, I mean, there's 2 kind of parts to it. It's the kind of informal part and there's the kind of more formal part. I think, and I imagine this is similar for many people here, that they're kind of, the informal part kind of starts with becoming more active in the Labour Party and becoming, you know, doing campaigning, learning about your local area, about kind of different councils or whatever, and what services they offer and what Labour councillors are doing in your area, district or county or whatever, or borough, and kind of getting an insight into local issues, and then obviously judging to yourself, you know, whether you want to run and what you can offer on that front. Obviously, in the terms of the formal process, I mean, it does vary from area to area, but in the most general sense, it involves, you know, submitting an application, kind of self-nomination, and obviously having a kind of panel interview or vet it, some form of vetting procedure, and then obviously going forward to some sort of there might be a shortlisting phase before we get into a kind of nomination or kind of selection or affirmation stage. And obviously, if it's a competitive selection, you obviously might have to make a kind of speech and pitch to local members in order to be why you should be selected as those candidates. But I think, you know, all these stages can seem very intimidating, but I think it's just about really kind of putting yourself out there. You know, you can do it. You know, often, you know, some different people from different backgrounds, different ages or whatever, you know, quite often, you know, they don't think to themselves, I can't do this, they just do it. So, you know, why can't you do that? That would be my biggest thing. Just put your name forward, have a go.
I really love that, Brad, and I think that's so true. I think often we're sort of taught to question ourselves and say, particularly as young people, and say, oh, why me? But actually, I think that's a really good question. You know, why not me? I know this area, I've done this work, I'm committed to my community, and I think sort of all of you have demonstrated that in sort of how you've spoken so articulately and passionately about that tonight as well. Helen, I'll just go to you next on that question, if that's all right, sort of how you found the process and sort of navigating through that.
Yeah, really similar to Brad, to be honest. I mean, there's loads of resources on the Labour Party. If you log into the Labour Party website and go to Tools for Activists, there's like hours-long webinars, there's like really quick fact sheets, there's crib sheets, there's a whole bunch of stuff around the actual kind of formal process, so have a read of that. Local councils will be able to tell you the same. Yeah, but generally people in the party have said to me, and I know I said to other people I know running, you'd make a good councillor. Kind of the first time someone says it, you think, oh, but I don't know what chapter 17, subparagraph 4b says in this constitution, so how would I be a councillor? And generally it's people saying you show up, so you're here, you're phone banking, you're door knocking, you're campaigning, you're talking about Labour when you're not at a Labour meeting, you represent the community, you have a voice, you have opinions, you're confident, you're good, people engage with you, you get a good response on the doorstep. All of these things are just characteristics, they're not necessarily Labour things, they're just things that you'll pick up as a person. So generally people say, you know, you've been a good councillor, have you thought about being a councillor, and your perception of what it means to be a councillor might actually be completely different to the lived experience of the councillors around you. So I'd say kind of forget what you think you know about what it means to be a councillor if you've not had that conversation with someone, if you've not been through that process, because there are some people who are really articulate and really confident and, you know, they know every rule and every line, and that's fantastic, and there's some people that don't. They've lived there all their life, they've raised their kids there, they care about the community, they know the issues, and they're really passionate. They don't even see themselves as political people, and they're both different types of people, and they're both incredible councillors. So yeah, that's what I'd say, I suppose, about getting into it.
Definitely, and I think that's such an important point, Helen, that sort of, you know, not to second guess yourself. And as you say, there's a lot of people that will think that are so dedicated to their community and have been doing, you know, things for years, and will think, oh, I'm not political and I'm not into politics. They're exactly the sort of person that should be representing their community and whose voices we want to amplify. So I think, yeah, that's a fantastic point. I'll move on to Archie's question next. Archie's having a few mic issues, so I'll ask this question. But it's quite interesting in terms of what we were discussing earlier in terms of centralisation. And it's how much do you think that the national level of politics affects the local level? So I'll go to Jonathan on that first, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. So obviously quite a bit. So if your area is a Labour voting area, a general election, you're more likely to have councillors that are Labour at a local level, and obviously vice versa in a Conservative area. Having said that, there is I think, a substantial proportion of the electorate. I wouldn't put a number on it, but yeah, I would say maybe, well, actually, okay, I'll have a guess. Maybe like one in 5, 1 in 4 voters that will vote on local issues. And so well, it's kind of reassuring actually that some people vote on national issues, because it's not all on you as a candidate. You know, even if you did no campaigning at all, you'd still get votes, and so it takes some of the pressure off. But yeah, so so national issues are important, but you know, there are a considerable small proportion of voters who do vote on whatever's happening locally.
Definitely, thank you. And I'll put that question to Will as well.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Of course, the national picture does affect the local picture, but actually what's been quite interesting since I've broken up, I've been looking at the on electoral calculus, and really the biggest thing that impacts you locally is the turnout. In most wards, we actually outpoll the Tories. It's just our voters don't turn out. So the biggest effect, I would say, of the national picture is that it just makes sure that our voters stay home, and the Tories, well, they're more likely to turn out anyway. So the biggest impact for us really isn't the national picture convincing our voters to defect as such. It's just our voters are staying at home because they're not feeling infused by the national picture, or they're feeling turned off by the national picture. So those are things that, you know, if you have a really good campaign on the ground, you have to really counter that, because otherwise people are just going to stay at home. That's your biggest worry, really, of a bad national picture.
Definitely, I think that makes quite a lot of sense, and it's that kind of important point around mobilisation as well, and sort of, as you say, making sure that the voters, are going to be on your side, turn up, and that they're engaged as well. I'll just put that one to Tina as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, happy to. I think when looking at the national and local picture, it's important to identify the ways in which they link. That's quite a good way. We were talking earlier about selecting local issues. That's one of the ways you can do that. I think that the national picture is really, really important. It's a major factor, but it does depend kind of what's going on in your local area as well, because if there's something really kind of contentious, like a planning application, that's going to hold a lot of sway. Yeah, I agree with the point about turnout, and I think that this year the turnout's going to be interesting as a factor, because it's really unclear what's going to happen with that. But I would say, kind of like, when you're messaging, if you can link your local stuff to our national messaging, I think that goes a long way.
I think that's a really good point as well, Tina, about sort of being able to fuse the two and make sure that there's that kind of interconnection there as well, to make sure sort of voters are engaged and infused, and they can see that the sort of, by voting locally, you are also having your say in the kind of wider national political conversation as well, which I think is sort of really important. So I think that's a really, really good point. We're sort of starting to approach the end of a session, but I really want to make sure all of our candidates can come in on one of our final questions and wrap up any closing remarks as well within this. And I think this will be quite interesting as well. Now we've got a few candidates watching, and I'm sure lots of our own Young Fabians members as well. And it's, if you had to give one piece of advice to a young person to encourage them to run in an election, what would you say? And I'm going to go to Milo first on this one.
I think just use it as a learning experience. Nobody's expecting you to run the flawless, West Wing style campaign that nobody's ever seen. It's just go in there, find out what the issues are on the ground and just articulate them, because you're just sort of a vessel and a beacon for people's issues, raising them. If people are mentioning potholes, even if you don't care about potholes, talk about potholes, because that's going to help Labour come out, because that's what people want. It's bins and potholes. They don't want to know about your lofty technocratic vision for 2030 Britain. You want to get these sort of, that's that. And so enjoy it. It's a good experience, especially if you're quite young. I was 18 then. I used to talk about my council experience when I was in university, because it's a good little anecdote sort of stuff. And just, you'll come back to think, I learned a lot, 10 years down the line, and you'll be a seasoned campaigner, you'll be a foot soldier for Labour when we're clearly winning majorities of 300. It's a good experience, and it's all a laugh, as well as a good performance for making sure we get that progressive future we all want.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Milo. I think there was some great sound bites in there as well. That I think you bring out further on in the campaign for sure. I'll go to Jonathan next on that one as well.
So so I guess one thing I'd like to add is that it's not like sitting an exam. Most of us have gone through GCSEs. Some of us will have done A levels. We will have all been at school and done exams, and it's not like that. 99% of what's scary about it is just in your head. It's something that should be enjoyable, and there's not a huge amount of pressure. It's not going to impact your life anyway if it doesn't go successfully. So it should just be enjoyed.
I think that's a really great point. I think particularly around sort of enjoyment as well, and sort of, obviously in AA there's a lot of stresses involved, but I think sort of making sure that you're able to kind of convey your enthusiasm and your passion as well, sort of which I think all of you have done really well tonight, is a really important aspect. Brad, I'll go to you next on that question.
In keeping with my kind of optimistic drive, it's such an overused phrase, but the kind of be the change you want to see, in the sense that throw yourself in, put yourself forward. You you can make a difference in your area. I mean, you know, whether, you know, you can change your CLP, you can improve your local party, you can make a difference in terms of how it campaigns and the outcomes you get in terms of those campaigns. You can make a difference in terms of your local area and changing issues. You know, you don't even have to win to change things in your local area. So, you know, you just got to put yourself forward and make that difference. I mean, some of the biggest problem I think we have sometimes is, you know, being, you know, doubting ourselves, as we said before, but also kind of looking to someone else to do something. You know, why can't people just change this? Well, you know what needs changing, so speak up, get involved, get active, put yourself forward.
Love that, Brad. I think that's a really fantastic point as well, in terms of sort of just, yeah, getting stuck in and taking these issues on. I'll go to Helen next on that question.
I'd say if you're thinking about being a candidate, you should be a candidate, because there's already a reason or some motivation or something driving you to think, yeah, maybe I could be, so you should be. And when you start that process, it's dead easy. Talk to someone in the CLP, in your local Labour Party, and ask them, oh, when's the next interviews, when's selection, when's my, like, people don't mind being asked the questions, even if you think it's a daft question. No one's born with this knowledge. None of us knew this before we had asked 300,000 questions about it. So it's dead easy to do. The other thing I'd say is try and build a support system. So for me, it's, you know, being friends who are particularly into politics, but you might be the only friend in your friendship group that cares about politics. So it comes to things like the Young Fabians, it might be, you know, Young Labour, it might be the young people in your CLP, just some people you have that are just slightly removed from your individual campaign to, you know, have a sounding board to bounce back off, to say, I don't actually know if this is a great message, what do you think of it? Having some people around you that can support you, because yeah, some days you're going to be on calls, you might have a full-time job from 9, you finish at 5, and you jump on a call at 5:30, and then you're on a call till 9:45, which doesn't sound very fun, but it's a lot easier if you've got a WhatsApp group like, oh, for God's sake, it's bringing this up again, or whatever it might be, because everyone's going to have calls that aren't overly fun, or meetings that aren't overly fun, just because process isn't always overly fun, but having that support system around you is really useful, and if you're thinking about it, you're probably exactly the right kind of person that should be doing it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Helen. I think that's yeah, so well expressed, and yeah, completely agree about that. Sort of, if, you know, if that thought is in there, sort of take it seriously and sort of take that opportunity where you're able to. Will, I'll go to you next on that question.
Lovely, thank you, Laura. I think, to be honest, I would say that the most important thing is to pick an issue that you really do care about. I know, you know, you are going to inevitably have to talk about potholes and bins. But if you pick an issue that you really care about, you know, and you research it and you're the best advocate you can be for it, people will remember that on the doorstep. You know, they might not remember exactly what you say, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. And if they feel that they can trust you and they believe that you believe what you're saying, and hopefully that will come across on the doorstep, that's going to be remembered next time. And I know I keep talking about in 2 or 3 years' time. I know a lot of us are running in, you know, Tory for seats or seats where we're less likely to win. You know, thinking in 2 or 3 years' time, if you've built up that reputation both within your local party, within your local community, someone who can be relied upon, who's trustworthy, who really cares about what they're saying, that way you'll have that reputation. So that way when you're talking to people who may usually vote Tory, they'll be like, oh, well, I normally vote Tory, but, you know, oh, you're the guy that really cares about education, or you're the guy who really cares about the environment. If they see that if they can connect with you on something like that, they're really going to respond well to it. And I think the key to that is having something that really does motivate you, because, you know, unfortunately there are losses in politics, and, you know, if you're campaigning about something that you really do care about, you're more likely to persist with it.
I think that's such an important point, Will, and I think particularly sort of remembering why you're doing it in the first place. That's a really, really important message, and sort of making sure that your advocacy and understanding of those issues is really clearly articulated as well. And last but by no means least at all, I will go to Tina for her thoughts on that.
Thank you. If I had to give one piece of advice to a young person to encourage them to stand, it's you have experiences which are really valuable. Your voice needs to be heard. So don't underestimate yourself. Don't let anybody make you feel like you can't do it. And like Helen said, if you're thinking about it, try it. You know, it does come with its challenges, of course it does, but it's one of the most rewarding experiences that I've had.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Tina. And I think that's a really fantastic point on which to start closing out what I think has been a really, really inspiring discussion. And so great to hear from all of you and sort of your dedication and your commitment to your local communities. It's really inspiring, I think, for all of us in Young Fabians. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone when I say we wish you all the best for the upcoming local elections, and we're definitely backing you every step of the way for sure. Before we go, I'd just like to remind you of some fantastic Young Fabians events that we've got coming up this week and in the near future as well. We've got Winning in the Midlands tomorrow at 7:15 with Jess Phillips. We've got a fantastic event from our Baines advocacy group on Black participation in Labour and the Young Fabians, which is on Wednesday at 7 p.m. And our North East Young Fabians Women's Roundtable on Thursday at 6:30 with Jessie Jo Jacobs, our very own Helen, and a top panel. So definitely be sure to check that one out. And I can see as well that we've got a link in the chat to our Young Fabians Scottish Parliament Roundtable, which is at 7 p.m. on Monday, the 12th of April. So make sure to check that one out as well and support all of our Scottish Young Fabians who are going to be running in local elections as well. And finally, just want to say, if you've enjoyed today's discussion and would like to get involved with the Young Fabians, please do check out all of our Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram and YouTube channels. I'd be a negligent comms officer if I didn't do a quick plug for those. And finally, I would just like to say a massive thank you to all of our fantastic candidates for joining us for such an important discussion on youth activism and making your voice heard and standing up for your local community. I think we've covered some really important issues. And also thank you to all of you that have joined us and asked your questions. It's really appreciated. And I hope